Today we're going to talk about something which is not all that statistical. It's in the field of statistics, but it's not in the mainstream again. But it's very interesting and very pretty pictures, and I thought you'd enjoy it, so we're going to learn about iterative function systems. Highly mathematical stuff. We're not going to worry about too much mathematics. We'll find it really kind of simple, straightforward. Okay, let's talk about it. Transformations. What happens is that we have ourselves a point in space here, and that point gets transformed into another point here by some set of equations. Here's the equations which does it. That is, if I'm at point x n, y n at particular time, then at the next time period I'll be at this is A, B, C, D, E, F are just numbers. I've just written them as letters, but they're numbers. And I multiply where I am, my x point by A, my y point by B, add C to it, and that's my position, my x position of this next point. If I want my y position, I take D times the position x plus E times where y was and add F to it, and that gives me this next point. So I go from here to here by a transformation. I go from here to here via this transformation. Now what happens is that at the very next instant I go from here somewhere else, maybe over to here, by this same transformation. I take this point and move it. And then they take this point, do it again, this point, move it, and then this point. Move. Sooner or later, the distances that I move get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until I sort of stick at one point. That one point is the absorption point, the point at which all points on the plane converge. If you were to take them and go through the transformations, they will all end up at that one point. That's the capture point for every point in the plane for this set of transformations. Now that's well known. Every different set of transformations will have a different point associated with it. Well, this is not something new. This is all well known. Everybody's known that for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands, not 100,000s, but at least 1,000 years. However, let's look at the picture, because we're going to use the pictures. What I've been talking about are called affine transformations. Some transformations can make the thing blow up. But if you take all the points in a triangle and transform them by a transformation into a smaller triangle, it can only go in a triangle, either bigger or smaller. But if you transform into a smaller triangle, we call it an affine transformation. And this is the kind of transformations which converge to a point. If you make one little triangle into a bigger triangle, that triangle is going to get even bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's not going to converge. It's going to just run all over the place. But if you make a big triangle into a small triangle by your transformation, that is, every point in this triangle converges to some point in this triangle, then we say we have an affine transformation, and the answer is that we'll end up at some point, generally a point inside that thing there. Okay? However, what happens if you have more than one transformation? What happens when you have more than one? Well, people would sort of intuitively say, oh, gee, that's kind of obvious. What will happen is this transformation. This is one transformation here. This is a second transformation, maybe even a third. You might have one, you might have two or three, but more than one. And these are just the constants for the various transformations. One might think that start with a point, this will translate you into another point, then start at that point, this one takes you in a second. So what you'll do, let's talk about two. Let's just say we have two transformations, easy enough. If we start out with a point here, we will go through each of these transformations and end up with 2 points. Then you go through, this point will take you through 2 transformations, and you'll end up with 2 points. This one will end up with 2 points, so you'll have 4 points. Then each one of these 4, you'll have 16 points. And then each one of those, and most people thought that if you did that, you'll end up at 2 points. One convergent from this sequence of numbers, and the other one converging from that sequence of numbers. And if you had 3, you'd end up at 3 different points in the plane. And that sort of the intuitive feel. You have a transformation, it brings you to a point. you have another affine transformation, a different point. You have a third affine transformation, a third point. If you have all of them going at the same time, well, you'll end up at 3 different points. That is, in the long run. Well, let's take some examples and see what actually does happen. Okay? Let's try it. See if we can get there. I guess you can't see it all at once. I'll move this thing. The dotted triangle, I hope you can see it, it's sort of a very weak color. The dotted triangle is the starting triangle. Then I transform it by one set of transformations into this blue triangle, and again into this maroon, violet, actually it's magenta triangle. Okay, so there's 2 triangles. And you'd sort of think that, well, maybe this would be a point here and a point there. What happens is that the resulting figure looks like that with those 2 triangles. This is a fractal. We have a bullet shape here. Within the bullet shape are other bullet shapes. Within those bullet shapes, you can't see them, but there are other little bullet shapes. And inside those bullet shapes, if you can magnify it, would be other bullet shapes. So when you have 2 transformations, you get a fractal. Well, does that happen all the time? Well, let's try another one. Here's 2 more. Maybe I should use a blue paper underneath it. How's that? Is that? Ah, yeah, that looks better. Okay. We have this dotted triangle is the original. Transform into this blue one here and this magenta one there. And what you get when you have those 2 transformations is not 2 points, but a feather. Very nice feather. The colors show you where the points, which triangle the points that are plotted come from, and I'll explain that later on maybe. But at any rate, you have a feather. General shape of the feather. Within that, there's another little feather. Each feather is a feather. And in that, there's a feather. This is a fractal. You get a fractal when you have 2 transformations instead of 1. Well, that's interesting. Let's try another one. Let me put the blue paper there. Okay. Dotted line, the original triangle. This blue one here, second triangle. This one way over here, third triangle. So that means I'm transforming by a transformation this triangle into this one by one transformation. A different transformation puts me into that triangle. And if I do this over and over and over again, an infinite number of times, each point transferred by this transformation and this transformation, and then those points by the 2 transformations, and every point, just keep doing it over and over again, I get this picture. Clearly, it's a fractal. All right. Let's try another one. Big triangle, slightly smaller triangle, a little smaller triangle. Those represent transformations. Remember, a triangle represents a transformation. So besides the original dotted one, there are 2, means 2 transformations. We get something looking like that. Sort of a V, and in it are V's, and in those are V's, and this is a fractal. Here's one I like. The original triangle. Here are the other 2 triangles, little funny places. And when you run points through those over and over again, you get a picture of the Eiffel Tower laying down. And inside that picture of the Eiffel Tower are other little Eiffel Towers. And inside those are little Eiffel Towers. Self-similarity. Self-similarity. This is a fractal. Here's one with more than 2, but I've sort of cheated here. Sort of cheated. There's the original triangle. The 2 triangles look like that, sort of symmetric. And one, I have a third triangle, which is just a straight line. It's kind of collapsed triangle. That's not much of a triangle, not much of a transformation. And what I get out of it looks like that, a tree. The straight line, the triangle that's collapsed, provide me with the stems of this tree. And the other 2 provide me with the whole picture of the tree. Interesting. All right, Oh, just in case you couldn't see those things, I made some out of black and whites. Here's the feather. Here's the triangles, and here's the picture. Here's the Leaning Tower of Eiffel. Here's the tree. That's a fern. Clearly a fern. And it's amazing how 4 simple transformations in this iterative function system can produce something so lifelike, so much like a fern. Okay? Well, actually, it wasn't as simple as all that. There's a practical problem. If I take the points in here and transform it into a point to the points in here, and the points in there, and the points in here, say, I've got maybe 10,000 points in here. So after the first generation, I have 40,000 points, or 30,000 points. If I transfer into 3 triangles, say, 30,000 points. Then I take each of those points and transfer it into other triangles. That will give me 30,000 times 30,000 points. I can hardly multiply already. But by the next generation, it will be 30,000 times 30,000 times 30,000 points. And in order to even attempt to print a nice-looking picture, I have to make lots and lots and lots of transformations, generations after generation. And that would take trillions of calculations, far beyond the capability of our present high-speed computers. So then, there's no way that I could draw the pictures that I showed you. No way I could do this iterative function system. It would sound like, oh, it's an academic exercise. The fact that you would get these iterative function systems if you did this transformation is very nice, and it was known before the high-speed computers were available, but it took people a very long time even to get just an outline of something until they realized that it was a fractal. But you've seen lots of pictures. How do I do it? I didn't wait trillions of years in order to solve the problem. What I did was use what's known as the chaos algorithm. And I'm going to tell you exactly what that is right now. The chaos algorithm. What you do for the chaos algorithm is you take one point, not the thousands of points that are in a triangle. Pick any point you like, one point. Randomly choose one of the transformations. Let's say I have 3 transformations. I don't take that point and go through each of them, producing 3 points from that one point. I randomly choose one of the transformations, and I transform the point into one other point and plot that other point. So I make only one point becomes 1 point. I've only done one calculation. Now, I just do this over and over again. You've got that point plotted, okay? Go back and randomly choose a transformation. Run that new point through that one transformation you've chose and plot it. Now you've plotted a point. Run it through some randomly chosen transformation and plot it. I could do this 1,000,000 times in just a minute or less. Computers can run things that fast. So if I do this over and over and over again, plot one point at a time. Start with one point and just keep following that one point around. If it was going through the same transformation over and over again, we know what would happen. It would end up at 1 point. But it's going through different transformations at different times because the transformation it goes through is randomly chosen. Well, what happens is that the chaos algorithm plot is the same as the iterative function system plot. In fact, we call it an iterative function system plot. That's how we get our iterative function system plots. We get them by using the chaos algorithm. We just one point over and over and over again. In fact, I'll show you a nice picture. This picture is only a third of the picture of the whole printout of my feather. And you can see, even on your screen, the detail that I get. I printed 1,000,000, so this is approximately a third of 1,000,000 points, 300,000 points about, on the screen here. And you can see the resolution. You can see the feather, you can see within it feathers, you can see within that feathers, you can see within that feathers, and within that feathers. So you can actually see very clearly what's going on. This is a very clear picture of the iterative function system plot. And it was done not by plotting all those points from every triangle. It was just pick one point and transform it. Then pick that point and transform it somewhere else. And pick that point, transfer it from... The key is that the transformations are randomly chosen from among those that are eligible to be used. And you end up with the same picture. Wow, that's nice. That's interesting. All right, let's play a little. Here's... See if we can see it properly. All right, so here's... Dotted triangle is the main triangle. Then there's actually 1, 2, 3 other triangles and a little straight yellow one you can hardly see. And what you get when you run those things, now just sort of remember where they are. There's a big triangle, there's a triangle here on the left, there's a triangle facing here on the right, and you can almost ignore the straight line down here. But those are the triangles. And what you get when you run them is a fern. We've seen the picture of the fern. That's the picture of the fern run from those triangles. Well, what I'm going to do now is plot the big triangle and only one of the other triangles, just the one on this side. So I've got this triangle and this triangle only. Of course, I'm going to get an iterative function plot or a fractal from it. What does it look like? It looks like that. What you can see here is the right side of your fern. The left side of the fern is missing, the stem is missing, but you can actually see the right side of the fern from just the two triangles. Ah, it's interesting. 2 triangles produce the right side of the fern. Well, what if we used different triangles? Okay, I will. Let's see if I can put it in the center here. I'm going to use the big triangle, and I'm going to use the triangle on the left. I do that, and what I get is the left side of the fern. Not the right side of the fern, not the stem, only the left side of the fern. The 2 triangles we saw produce the left side of the fern. That's nice. And if I add the 2 triangles at the same time, what I get is the whole fern except for the stem. So I get the right side and the left side of the fern. I've added the triangles and I get a superimposed image. And of course, if you go back and you put in the last piece, the yellow, put in the little yellow one, and maybe you can see it, maybe you can't, it's right there. Now I have the whole system, you get the whole fern. Very nice. Okay. What has that got to do with practical things? It does. Soon will be high-definition television, as an example of a practical thing. In order to send that signal across the airwaves, we'll take an extremely wide bandwidth. Oh, I don't know how many, 5 or 10 different channels in order to send one picture. And they just don't want to do that. They have to find a way to take all that information in the television picture and send it across the airwaves to your television set, the high-definition television set, so that you can see this high-resolution picture and do it in the same bandwidth that they're sending a regular television picture. Well, right now it can't be done. However, if we can take the pictures and condense them into just a few equations, you can easily send the picture across the airwaves and then create the picture on the other side when it gets there. Well, that's what they're working on. Iterative function systems. They're taking a picture and breaking it down into just a few equations, a few transformations. Then they're sending the equations across the airwaves, and that takes no time at all. They can send thousands and thousands of equations in a fraction of a second across the airwaves. To send one big picture might take 20 times as long as sending these equations. So what they do is they take the picture, break it down into component equations, send the equations across, and then reconstruct the picture on the other side instead of sending the pixels of the picture across. And that's a practical use of this kind of thing. And the chaos algorithm makes it possible. Okay? Another use of this I want to talk about: genetic growth. What if genes represented transformations? Now, I'm not going to talk about biology. I assume you all know what genes are. But let's assume that genes represent transformations. Okay? And, well, I tell you, something always bothered me about genetics. And that is, here we are. Every part of our body has the same genes. Take a cell out, same genes. Cell here, same genes. Take an eye, same hair, same genes. When we're a baby, same genes as when we're an old man, old woman. How do the genes, how come we have different parts of the body? How come sometimes we're young, sometimes we're old? If the genes caused all this all at once, we'd be born the same way we would stay until we died. But that's not what happens. We develop. We grow. Well, iterative function systems, geometry of nature, fractals, geometry of nature. What if fractals were to explain how people develop and grow and mature? Well, same problem. We have a set of equations, a set of transformations, and they produce a picture. And that's it. There's one picture. Well, that's sort of the same problem as genes. Equations produce one picture. Well, I found a way to have a set of equations and turn some on and some off. I won't go into the details of it here, but there's a key. Each equation has associated with it a set of digits. And there's a key which unlocks some of these equations and leaves others of them locked. So at each, what happens, I'm assuming, is that when I drew my pictures for iterative function systems, and you'll see them in a moment, that sometimes I just send a sequence of numbers, and that sequence of numbers turns some equations on, some equations off, and each time you have different equations on, you have different fractals coming out. And if those fractals could be arranged if those equations could be arranged in a proper way, you could see something developing. And that's what led me to this genetics stuff. When the cells divide, let's say some key determines which genes are on and off. There are lots and lots of genes in the body, but they're not all functioning at the same time. A person is born, they have a cell. That cell divides. When the cell divides, different genes are turned on and off, so the two cells now take different functions. They divide again, and the key is different for those, and then we have different functions. And then the person grows. We have an arm cell, and we have a head cell, and we have a heart cell, and everything different. As things develop, they have different keys, and they develop into different properties. What if that were the case? Okay? What I say then is that different parts of the body would develop differently over space and time. If you could make some genes turn on, some genes turn off, and a gene is a function, a transformation in an iterative function, then you could get different pictures out. As the body develops, as the cells develop, they have different properties. We'll get back to talking genetics again. Let's go through a bunch of pictures and see what happens when I do this with my iterative function systems. What I had here first was a system of only 6 equations. And I had a key. And the key turned some equations on, some equations off. And that's what I got first with my first digit. I changed my digit. I got this picture. It seems to be getting bigger. And now I changed my key again, and I got this picture. And I changed my key again, and I got that picture. Seems to be developing. I changed my key, I get this picture. Now what I did from here to here, I think, was I added a little randomness to the functions, to the coefficients A, B, C, D, E, and F. I added a little randomness, and I got a fuzzy picture. Apparently, well, we'll talk about fuzziness in a minute. I just want to go through another sequence. Here are 17 equations. I have 17 transformations and a key. Each one has a key next to it. And I put in a sequence of numbers which would either turn some of the equations on or leave them off. And that was the first picture I got out from my sequence. And that's the next picture that I get from my sequence. That's the next picture. That's the next picture. There's only one set of equations, but the key is turning some on and some off. That's the next. I think one more and you'll be able to see what I'm getting at. Ah, there it is. Is that a fractal? Sure. Look, look, even the eye has a face. Even the head has a face. Actually, even the sides, you can see, have faces in them. Everything is just a distorted picture of the whole. That's a fractal. That's a fractal. And it comes from turning on some of the equations, leaving some off. And there it is. There's my whole picture. Even has the ears. And what I did now is I tweaked it a little bit. And I got a slightly different picture. And then I decided I'd add some randomness, and I got these pictures. This one here with the straight eyes, and this is even more randomness with the slanted eyes. What happens when you introduce randomness to the coefficients? When we saw in fractals, it made it look more realistic. In iterative function systems, when you introduce randomness, it makes it fuzzy. Well, fuzzy might make it look more realistic, I don't know, but certainly it makes it look fuzzy for iterative functions, and certainly more realistic for regular fractals. Okay? Let's talk now about higher dimensions. If we're talking about human beings or even plants, they have so many properties, like the electrical properties of the system, the chemical properties, the properties of whether it's a plant and it manufactures chlorophyll or not. There's so many different functions that cells can do or not do. Well, if we had just X and Y, it would draw a nice picture of it. If you have X, Y, and Z, it'll draw a three-dimensional picture. But if you have more dimensions, and the dimensions are not space dimensions, but chemical dimensions or electrical dimensions or emotional dimensions, you could have this cell have lots of different characteristics, all controlled at the same time by the gene. The genes are very complicated, so there can be many, many dimensions in that. We don't have to worry about not being enough dimensions. There's plenty of dimensions there. And each dimension controls something else, so that we have really complicated systems. We turn on a few equations, and we have a whole cell with all its various properties. Turn off this equation, turn on a different one, we get a different picture. We turn on a few of them, we get some comprehensive pictures of what's going on there. Okay? So we can talk about higher dimensions. We can't do it on the screen, but we can certainly talk about it. Now, what about things like cancer? Can you explain cancer? Well, what if this key, we said we put a sequence of numbers, let's say we put 101 to make it do a certain thing, make it a skin cell. Well, what happens if instead of when the cell divides, instead of the number changing to make it an ex-neighbor cell, it gets stuck. So it just keeps producing 101, 101, 101, 101. Each successive cell is 101. Then all the cells will be the same. They'll be identical to each other. And cells identical to each other, not differentiating, is called cancer. That's what cancer is. Cells that just grow, they just replicate themselves without changing, without differentiating. Okay, we can explain cancer with our system. Can you explain death with the system? Well, it's terrible to end off with a term called death, but that's easy to explain. We're producing different numbers, and we've got a code in our genes which are matching up with the numbers to see if they should turn on or off. Well, what if you only had so many digits in your code? And as you're reproducing your cells, you've reproduced so many times that you have now run out of digits. And if you reproduce, there's no way of this gene interpreting the digit because it's no longer got that much code. Well, what happens? The person cannot develop. They cannot grow. They die. You can't grow your cells. If you can't replace cells that are dying away, you die. Things get weak. The organs get weak. The body ceases to function properly, and you die. So the simple theory, using iterative function systems, can explain how plants and humans and people and all sorts of things develop. Now, of course, this is a rather simple, oversimple theory. There's no way that we here are going to explain how a human being develops. The idea is that the mathematics of the development must be iterative function systems because it can be explained so simply using an iterative function system. Okay? Have a happy.